Welcome everyone. We're about to get started. I'll just checking a couple more things and then we'll kick off. Hi everyone and welcome. We're just kicking off our online Don't Dump on the NT briefing. So thanks all for coming. I'd like to open by acknowledging that we dial in today from the unceded lands of the Larrakia people. And I'd also like to acknowledge the unceded lands from which you're dialing in today. And I'd also like to extend my respect and solidarity to any First Nations people here on the call today and acknowledge that the impact of projects like these, projects like these have on land and sea country across Australia. So I'll just start us off with some housekeeping. You'll notice that we've got a webinar setting here today, which means that audience members can see presenters and the shared screen, but they won't be able to see each other. This setting allows us to record the session without attendees being filmed or any unexpected interruptions of unmuted mics. So you'll be able to access a recording of this later online. You can ask questions via the Q&A function, which you'll see at the bottom of the screen. So feel free to test that out now. And you can raise your hand to ask a question, at which point your profile will become visible and will be captured in the recording. If you have any questions or issues hearing or seeing the presentation, Sarah will be monitoring the Q&A, so you can pop a question or an issue in there as it arises. And as I said, the presentation will be recorded and we're aiming to make it available online later on. So thank you all for coming midweek to a briefing on carbon dumping. Today we're talking about the plans for the world's largest offshore carbon dumping project. Carbon dumping is the latest sinister greenwashing tactic being used by the gas industry, and it's coming right here to Darwin. Japanese gas giant INPEX has just lodged plans with the Federal Environment Department for Australia's first offshore carbon dumping project. So this is also connected with the Middle Arm Gas Hub that many of you may know of already, which is being propped up by taxpayers' dollars, and it's at the heart of Big Gas's carbon dumping scam for the Northern Territory. And today we have an incredible panel for you to talk us through the project and its impacts. We have Dr. Kirsty Howie, Executive Director of the Environment Centre, Dr. Ryan Day, who is a Senior Research Fellow at the University of Tasmania Institute for Marine and Antarctic Studies. We've got Louise, who is the advocate, Louise Morris, who's the advocate at the Australia Institute, and finally Chelsea Deng, who is a fossil fuel campaigner at the Australian Marine Conservation Society. So we hope that you come away from this panel a lot more knowledgeable about carbon dumping, full of information that empowers you to act. And I'm going to pass over now to Dr. Kirsty Howie, who'll give us a general overview of INPEX's carbon dumping project. Kirsty Howie is the Executive Director of the Environment Centre NT and has led the organisation since October 2020. She's an advocate, researcher and strategist with over 20 years experience, and Kirsty has been the lead voice in recent scandals and national campaigns, including blowing the lid on Santos's methane leak. Thank you, Kirsty.
Thanks so much, Suki. Lovely to see you all here. I am speaking to you from unceded Larrakia country, just like Suki, and I'd like to pay my respects to them and their elders, past and present, and note that much of the project that we are going to be talking about tonight is to be located, if it goes ahead, on Larrakia land, and that Larrakia have been particularly subject to, I would call it dispossession by the gas industry specifically over the last 20 years. And this project represents yet another iteration of that ongoing story. So I just wanted to start with a slide that we often show when we're talking about gas expansion in the Northern Territory, and it makes really clear what we are facing here in the Northern Territory. We are already a petrostate, and we aspire to become even more of a petrostate. And we describe ourselves as being at ground zero for the fossil fuel industry's expansion plans in Australia. And that involves both onshore and offshore gas expansion. And this project really is designed at its heart to greenwash all of these projects that you see linked here on this map. And some of those projects include fracking in the Beetaloo Basin to the south of Darwin, which, if it goes ahead, could generate 1.2 billion tonnes of emissions, increasing Australia's emissions by some 20%. Santos's toxic Barossa gas field to the north of the Tiwi Islands, comprising 18% carbon dioxide. And we have also got other prospective fields like the Cash Maple field, of course, Greater Sunrise, which is planned to be operated by Woodside. ENI's Verus field, also very carbon dioxide intensive, and all roads and pipelines are all planned to come right here to the middle of Darwin Harbour, to the planned Middle Arm gas and petrochemical hub, which Australian taxpayers are currently slated to fund to the tune of $1.5 billion. If we can just go to the next slide, I'll show you in a little bit more detail just where the focus of this project is in relation to the proposed Middle Arm gas hub. So you can see here, we do have gas already here in the middle of Darwin Harbour. So the Ichthys LNG facility is INPEX's LNG facility, and it is monstrous. It's one of the largest polluters in the country, a few kilometres from the suburbs of Darwin. We also have Santos's LNG export hub, Darwin LNG, the site of the famous leaking tank for the last 20 years, the site of also some fairly horrific flaring, which we've encountered in the last 24 hours and have been rushing to try to respond to. And the rest of that drawing is what is projected to be built here, which is a huge expansion of the gas industry, a third LNG export hub to take fracked gas from the Beetaloo Basin, a number of LNG export wharves, and probably CO2 import wharves to supply this project. So this is the Frankenstein-like reality that we are facing here, the transformation of the place that we all love here that we call home. So this project, if we can just go to the next slide, is allegedly, according to INPEX, would be the world's largest carbon pollution dumping project. And it would see up to 10 million tonnes of CO2 per annum injected under the seabed to the west of Darwin in the Bonaparte Gulf for about 30 years. And essentially what would happen is that that site, Middle Arm, that I showed you would be connected to this offshore dumping place by a 260-kilometre subsea CO2 transport pipeline and other infrastructure. We'd see 6 injection wells and 30 years of seismic monitoring, immensely harmful to marine life, over a huge area of 1,800 kilometres squared. And this is the site of like some limited gas development, but is largely a fairly, intact gulf that we really don't have a lot of scientific knowledge about. Next slide, please. So this project has been in development for some time. Where it became kind of it punctuated the public consciousness was in 2022 when Madeleine King made a massive offering. It did make some headlines of new offshore greenhouse gas storage acreage, ostensibly to help lower emissions. And through that process, INPEX was awarded a permit in a joint venture with Total Energies and also Woodside. That then led to sort of a joint study in 2024. And in July this year, there was a very troubling media release by the new Resources Minister, Tim Ayres, who branded it a clean energy project. It was awarded a major project status, this huge INPEX carbon dumping project. We saw a shift in the language and the branding of this as a clean energy project. And very recently, the project was referred under the EPBC Act, and submissions on the referral have recently closed. But of course, we can expect a very, very extensive EIS project for this very unproven, untested, and massive project. Next slide, please. So this is an image from INPEX's sort of promotional brochure, and it shows where sort of the CO2 might come from. There's specific mention made of course, INPEX's Ichthys LNG facility, which takes gas from Western Australia at the moment. They're on the hunt for other sources to backfill their LNG facility from the 2030s. It would also take CO2 from Santos's Darwin LNG, the leaking LNG tank, which is proposed to be backfilled with Barossa gas imminently. It could also take CO2 from Middle Arm Gas Hub Industries, which would include a new fracked gas LNG export hub and possibly a range of petrochemical and other industries, highly emitting industries. And most troublingly and bizarrely, those wharves that I showed you could actually see the import of CO2 via crazy ships from countries like Japan and Korea. So with this sort of monstrous circulation of carbon that would turn little old Darwin into a huge dumping ground, and it would cost INPEX a hell of a lot of money. Next one, please. One thing that is really important to note, and others may go into more detail about this, is, of course, we all know this is a massive greenwashing attempt. The actual amount of CO2 sequestered and stored is a tiny proportion of the overall emissions of even INPEX's projects. That's not even counting the other projects. It's tiny in scale, if it indeed works, which is the big question that others will go into. Next one. So I think I'm not possibly going to explain this with the due reverence that it deserves, but we have been hunting around for what makes this marine environment special. It is sort of very close to and encompasses some of the Oceanic Shoals Marine Park, and a lot of it is pretty much unexplored, and that is very typical of Northern Australia. You know, you find that one of the reasons that crazy projects get up is because there's minimal to no baseline. There's very little scientific research, but this place is really characterised by some pretty incredible features, including carbonate pinnacles made out of limestone, lots of terraces, and quite beautiful and unique and highly valued marine areas. Next one. Darwin is a very special place. It is the best place in the world, actually, and it's also beloved by the critically endangered Far Eastern curlew. And this is a salt pan, which is adjacent to Darwin LNG. You can see the tank just behind there. And our wetlands in Darwin Harbour are characterised by these salt pans and this very, very rich intertidal zone. And we have a nationally important population of Far Eastern curlews, and this is where they like to hang out. I have a colleague, Amanda Lillyman, who is like the renowned expert of migratory shorebirds in Darwin Harbour, and she took us here recently with the CEO of BirdLife Top End, and we looked at the wondrous place where these birds hang out, and they're all here at the moment on their massive flight from Asia, and they want to put part of this project smack bang through the middle of this habitat. It's absolutely crazy, and that's just one species. Next slide. Look, this is probably best case scenario by INPEX. And, you know, I'll let others go into the timeframes. They're always quite ambitious, but they want to get this done ASAP, despite the project's complexity, and really be commencing injection within about 5 years. So that's a very, very short timeframe to get this up, and will require a lot of approvals. I can't remember how many off the top of my head, But usefully for INPEX, a former INPEX boss currently occupies the role of the territory coordinator and has the power to exempt all 32 environmental laws in the Northern Territory for projects to go ahead. So we're just sort of waiting with bated breath to see how much shortcutting there'll be for this project in terms of approvals, although it can't obviously impact the EPBC Act. Next slide. Yes, I mean, that Northern Australia is littered with, huge amounts of different fossil fuel tenements, gas tenements, and we know that there are many other projects in the pipeline, pardon the pun. Some of the acreages are demonstrated here. Santos has not forgotten its crazy scheme to dump CO2 in the old Bayu Undan field, which is now depleted. And I think Santos and INPEX are in a bit of a race, at least superficially, to see who can get this up, who will win this race, which was actually said to us by an INPEX employee. And getting towards the end, yep, here's another sort of monstrous vision for the future of Darwin. So we will see potentially carbon pollution dumping projects like this, greenwashing, huge amounts of fossil fuel expansion that could be in the order of, we estimate, 3 billion tonnes of emissions for all of these projects if they get up. Thank you. That's it from me.
Thanks so much, Kirsty. We're now going to be hearing from Dr. Ryan Day, who'll be talking about the marine impacts of seismic blasting, which is an ongoing part of the carbon dumping process. Ryan is a senior research fellow at the University of Tasmania's Institute for Marine and Antarctic Studies. He has investigated the impacts of seismic surveys on socioeconomically important invertebrate fisheries for the past 13 years. His research has largely focused on the southern rock lobster, commercial scallops, pale octopus, and the zooplankton community. So thank you so much, Ryan.
Thanks, Suki. And before I start, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional and original owners of the land I'm coming from, the Muanina and Palawa people, and pay respect to the elders that have passed before us and emerging elder community. Next slide, please. And I also need to put up a little disclaimer. Oh, sorry, next one again. Put up a little disclaimer that I'm coming to you tonight as a independent scientist, so communicating about the science that we've done and the science that's involved in seismic surveys. My participation tonight doesn't constitute support by myself or UTAS or IMAS, support or opposition to the ECNT's campaign, the Bonaparte CCS project, seismic surveys in general, and that I need to be transparent about my funding, which comes from a range of fisheries, from the Australian government, and also energy companies, including CGG and Beach Energy. Next slide, please. So to give you a run through of what seismic surveys entail, and this was the part Kirsty mentioned that is going to cover an 1,800 square kilometer area. So seismic surveys are conducted throughout the world's oceans, primarily to find oil and gas deposits and monitor their extraction. Also to profile sites for marine construction. So when they're building wells, building windmills, that sort of thing, checking on the ground composition there. And then more commonly now, what we're seeing is with CCS carbon capture project site identification and monitoring. And seismic has been described as a crucial part of CCS projects. So when these surveys are conducted, what they involve is a large ship like what you can see here, towing an array of air guns of various different sizes. And all of these air guns work together to generate a bubble in the water column that pops almost instantaneously. And that popping generates this really intense impulsive signal. That signal can penetrate 10 to 20 kilometers through the seabed, where it reflects off different layers of the seabed and gives geophysicists an idea of the composition and where deposits might be, where the aquifers might be, where they're going to inject the carbon dioxide in this case. And each one of these signals can reach around 220 to 260 decibels. And that's a really big number. And it's really hard to put into context. But along with this really loud sound, there's also other factors which we like, including, so it can actually make the seabed shudder, vibrate, something we call ground roll. There's also an effect called particle motion, where when sound moves through the air, it moves in waves. But when it moves through water, it actually compresses the water against the next bit of water. And so it moves out almost like a wave, but it's actually the particles of water being pushed away. So it's really an intense sound. Really hard to compare to the way we hear, because there's such big differences in the way sound is measured in the water versus in the air. But advice given to divers is that they must stay at least 27 kilometers away from any operation, and recommended safety margin of at least 30 kilometers. So, sorry, adverse effects have been observed at up to 27. So you need to stay 30 kilometers away. So that's for humans diving. When it comes to other animals in the water, most of them we just don't see. So we have no idea what their exposure range is. And when there's things like whales, other cetaceans, you know, they have to stop when they're around. But one of the problems is these surveys operate, you know, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week for weeks to months on end. So it's almost impossible to catch them all the time. And yeah, as we've already said, you know, it covers hundreds to thousands of square kilometers. One of the biggest ever proposed recently off the coast of Tasmania, Victoria, and South Australia was up to 55,000 square kilometers. So that's 80% of the size of Tasmania, and about, I think, 3 times the size of Kakadu Park. So these can be absolutely enormous. So when we talk about, you know, these air guns being fired off every 4 to 10 seconds constantly for that time period, it's affecting just a massive amount of ocean. And specific to CCS projects, what we see is that not only are they crucial to the CCS projects themselves, so in one of the most well-documented projects in the world is the Sleipner project in Norway. We saw that over 20 years, they had about 10 surveys all up, so averaging a survey every other year. So that is a lot. But on top of that, because that seismic vessel is contracted to be there, is booked, and will be on site at a known time, that encourages other projects that might not have gone ahead to tag along and get those extra projects done. So when we see, like in Bass Strait, if we have this vessel come down from Singapore where it's berthed, whenever it gets approved for one, we tend to see, you know, 2 or 3 pop up extra. So it's a lot of seismic over a long period of time, and covering 1,800 square kilometers is a very large area. Next slide, please. And then in terms of the specific effects, historically, there's a really large focus on marine mammals, because we know that they really rely on hearing and sound for communication. And what we see, and you know, I know that there's a number of cetacean species that are in the area, the proposed acquisition area. And so what we tend to see with them, it can cause pretty harmful physiological damage to their hearing ability. It interrupts their communication, so they can't speak to each other very well. And oftentimes it causes them to just leave the site for extended periods of time, either due to their own discomfort with being there or lack of food, because studies on fish also show that they tend to either significantly change their behavior, so change where they sit in the water column, or again, leave entirely. It tends to be very species specific. And so if your species of interest hasn't been studied, it's almost impossible to predict what the effect will be. Now, my research focuses on invertebrates, which is really important because they comprise more than 90% of all marine life. And up until we started doing our research 13 years ago, they were almost entirely unstudied. And we see a whole range of effects. Again, it can be a bit species specific. So, you know, we see really high levels of mortality in scallops and plankton. Plankton is really important as it's the basis of the food web, feeds larval fish, and everything kind of on the way up. We see altered behavior in octopus and lobster. We see impaired development in young lobster, immune function damage in scallops, lobster, and octopus, sensory system damage, physiological regulation disruption. So just to give you an idea what that means, like when you go to a doctor and get a blood test and they tell you, these are the various levels, here's the acceptable ranges, that sort of thing. Scallops, which basically just take in seawater, become unable to regulate their blood. So really, really severe disruption. And then feeding and nutrition effects in lobster and octopus. So a broad range of effects in a very small collection of animals. What's really unclear, though, is that, because so little research has been done, we often can get conflicting results. So there was another group that did some work on the same species of scallop that we did in Bass Strait, and they found no effect at all. And when you only have kind of two studies saying opposite things, it's very difficult to interpret what that actually means. We don't have a good grasp on the mechanism for damage, so how these sound waves or how the ground roll actually affects these animals. So it makes it almost impossible for us to say, well, this happened in a southern rock lobster, so we expect that same thing to happen in a tropical rock lobster. It just doesn't, because we don't understand the mechanism, it makes it very difficult to apply it to other species. Our limited species range has just really focused on fisheries, because those are the organizations that have the money to put up to fund this sort of research. So important, ecologically important animals, we just don't know. We haven't looked, and we would really like to, but it's just very difficult to do. And when we do these studies, it's pretty limited in how we expose them. It might not fit every circumstance. So everything we've looked at has been animals exposed in Bass Strait in 12-degree water, in 50 meters depth. So how does that apply to this project, where I think the depth is more along the lines of 90, 100, 120 meters? We have no idea. And then whether what these effects that we've observed them while they're in captivity after the study. We don't know what that actually means out in the wild. So it might, they might do fine when we're feeding them really well, keeping them in super clean water, but out in the wild, it could be a totally different story. And then generally, when we do these experiments, we expose them to kind of one line of seismic, not the up and down, back and forth grid pattern that'll take place, for months at a time, every other year. And my time is almost up. I think if we go next slide, I think that's it for me. Yep, and yep, just a photo of us out in the field enjoying the relatively calm waters of Bass Strait. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Ryan. We've got a couple of questions in the chat. What I'd ask if people could pop them in there, and then at the end of the panel presentations, we'll ask those questions to panelists. But thank you so much, Ryan. We're now going to be hearing from Louise Morris, who is an advocate at the Australian Institute. Louise will be talking about how carbon dumping is enabling the gas expansion, particularly in relation to offsets. Louise is the advocate with the Climate and Energy Program at the Australian Institute, focusing on fossil fuels and carbon pollution dumping and offsets. Louise is an award-winning advocate with over 20 years' experience across climate, forests, markets campaigns and politics. Before working with the Australian Institute, Louise was the fossil fuels campaign manager at the Australian Marine Conservation Society, where she started the organisation's work on offshore gas and carbon pollution dumping via CCS. So thank you so much, Louise.
Thanks so much, Suki. And like Ryan, I'd also like to acknowledge I'm on the lands of the Mornina people tonight in glorious Lutruwita, Tasmania. And I think I've heard Ryan do the seismic info a few times, and every time I am torn between absolute terror and blinding rage that this can happen in the ocean. So thanks again, Ryan, for sharing this knowledge. It is so underbaked in public knowledge. What's also underbaked is that CCS is BS. This is a deep and abiding passion of mine from last job and a few jobs before as well, of this crazy thing that we have of carbon capture and storage. So I might just jump to the next slide, please. So I wanted to give a bit of a potted history of CCS, because if you've ever heard about it, well, a lot recently talked about in the media or by its pundits, it's always this magical thing that's going to happen in 20 years and it's going to save us from whatever ill is on the horizon. So looking at the potted history of CCS, it's been around for over 100 years. Amazing genesis story. Around the 1970s, kind of got attached to power plants to deal with some problematic emissions. And then in 1996, we really see CCS given its first red hot crack at trying to dump some carbon pollution. And you would have heard Ryan talk about the Sleipner project off Norway. So this is a project that's frequently touted by international and proponents here as this incredible example of how Norway got it right. When you actually read what happened, it's never gone right. So Sleipner kicked off, God, it's a while ago now, 30 years. Had to happen because of carbon tax. We all know Australia kind of couldn't quite get it together to get a carbon tax, yet we've still got CCS, so we lose, go us. It's had a hell of a lot of failures, and then it took almost 10 years for Norway to have another crack at offshore carbon dumping with a project called Snøhvit. And what I really love about these two projects is they're both names of fairy tales. Sleipner, of course, is the eight-legged horse of Odin. Snow White is Snøhvit, so, you know, a woman who lived in the forest with a few guys and had an apple allergy. None of these stories went well. CCS is not going to go particularly well. And then we come to Australia, 2019, WA, my home state originally, and the Gorgon-Barrow Island project. And this is always put forward in Australia as, look, we did it. And if you ever read the freaking federal budget, got nothing better to do, or hear someone talking about this incredible thing that Chevron did off the coast of Western Australia, which is exactly why things like Bonaparte and Browse are going to work. Couple of key points. Barrow Island is an island. It's not offshore, a bit simpler than offshore. Gorgon has also gone horribly wrong. So it's been around for a while. Can we just jump to the next slide and give a little bit of an example on that one? Oh, did I put Norway first? All right, let's talk about Norway. Back one. Yeah, we'll stay there. That's all good. So we'll go to the international and then we'll leap to the Australian. Sleipner, eight-legged horse, going nowhere. The migrated faster than expected is a really good industry word for it leaked. So the CO2 pumped in, as the diagram said would happen, sat there and then went and migrated somewhere that had not been tracked by previous seismic and other geo explorations. So the CO2 migrated off, and there was a little bit of, you know, consternation of the engineers of, where's the CO2 gone? It moved off, and had it not been for some absolute dumb piece of luck, there was a strong rock cap over where the CO2 migrated, which held it. Otherwise, they would have had a disastrous leak. Snøhvit, Snow White, was meant to go for 18 years. Didn't quite make it, 18 months. I think if you were being graded in a university essay, that'd be a fail. And they had to stop and then do some back working actions. It's never really kicked off properly since then. Can we go to the next slide? And then I'll get to Gorgon, which I got very overexcited about. Gorgon, the Chevron CCS success story. So you can read to yourselves on this one. Every year since it started has been a litany of problems. Clogged the pipes, the pressure valves, they couldn't quite get it right. CO2 release, nice way of saying a leak. Corrosion, this is a big one that Chelsea can talk to as well. A lot of issues with CO2 being highly acidic when it hits certain types of metals, which gets very complex when we're talking about various versions of repurposing old pipelines, and system downtime. It keeps breaking. And this has been, you know, year on year, it just gets worse and worse. And then yesterday we got some new data, which we'll go to the next slide, please. So credit to Kevin Morrison at the Institute of Energy Economics Financial Analysis, who got a cracking report out yesterday, which you can see on their website, which gives our latest year of Gorgon's incredible track record. As you can see, 2019, not quite doing what they said they were going to do. Now, keep in mind, Gorgon has said that they're going to capture 80% of their emissions. They've never cracked it, sometimes 3%, sometimes 5%, and getting worse. So, you know, can't wait to see next year's numbers. Next slide, thanks. This comes to the greenwashing point. Kirsty mentioned the incredible announcement by Minister Ayres not too long after he became a minister of this project, major project status, I should say. And on the face of it, there was, solar projects, you named it, wrapped in and buried, which I've made the text a bit bigger so you can see the Bonaparte mention, was this incredible celebration of the Bonaparte CCS project. And you can read all the points being wrapped into this major project status. Now, a few problems with this in terms of we know CCS is not clean, middle arm, a bunch of problems. But the other part of this means that taxpayers' money are being funded into allowing CCS to go ahead in our ocean. It's also taxpayers' money being given to Bonaparte CCS, which is, of course, INPEX behind it. I hear INPEX has a bit of cash and can probably pay for it for themselves, but it'll be good to know when we all have lodged our tax returns, some of that's going to this one as well. So we have a greenwashing effort which is being supported by taxpayers' monies and a government who are so complicit right now with enabling more fossil fuel projects and this incredible hub at Middle Arm, which Kirsty's given an incredible example of how problematic it is for people, environment and climate. Next slide, thanks. This was an incredible moment that happened in July, which I'm preempting with an article. In July, after we had Minister Ayres' announcement of CCS as renewable, it's a little bit 1984, we had a hard and fast roll in the Parliament sitting week where a report was launched by a mob called the Low Emissions Technology Australia Fund, which was shopping this thing called Sequestration Nation. So my colleague Ebony penned this little approach of what we thought of the report in the Canberra Times, which you can read quickly there. Can we go to the next slide, please? I know I'm running low on time. So the key thing of the Sequestration Nation outlined in this report was, and this report was launched by Minister King, the Minister for Resource, was a national vision of turning Australia into a carbon dump. And when you think about what's been announced for Middle Arm as a place that can take the world's carbon, process it through Middle Arm and then dump it in various places, this has set off all the red flags for a number of us who've read it of this is the new face of fossil fuels in Australia. We'll go to the next slide, thanks. I'll go quickly. And I wanted to just give this as a perspective because a lot of people have this disconnect of Darwin's over here, the East Coast energy market is over there. But what this proposed was actually using the existing gas network to basically run a parallel CCS infrastructure along. So Darwin, first big stonking CCS import hub, and then there's proposals in this report for Gladstone, for the Gippsland, for Otways, and then WA has its own story, but that's not connected. So we need to be really cognizant of this isn't just Darwin being put on the chopping block. Darwin is the first point of call should this industry get up. And the main thing in this report is the cap in hand was out in full force of we need the government to step up and subsidise and support this incredible Sequestration Nation vision. Next slide, thanks. I'll do a little bit of the enablers because this, I think, will transition well into some of Chelsea's points. We've got 3 levels of enablers that are live at the moment. And from the international, one of the most important things that happened back in November 2023 was the federal government changed something called the Sea Dumping Act, which sits within the London Protocol. And that's when carbon dioxide stopped being a prohibited waste product that up until that point could not be dumped in our ocean. That change means that our oceans are now open for business for the world's carbon pollution. So bring your ships, bring your pipelines, you can dump it in our ocean. At the national level, Australian emissions policies, future gas strategy. This is one of the most dangerous documents the government's dropped on us in a while. And the future gas strategy in its kind of early draft 22-23 had a couple of paragraphs for CCS. The paragraphs just keep getting bigger, and seismic blasting and acreage release for CCS and these elements is also mentioned in there. And the other one in there is the safeguard mechanism, which I'll crack on about in a little bit. And then the net zero sector is important because you can see industry and waste and resources. This is where we hit the business. Next slide, thanks. Safeguard mechanism. When I hear safeguard mechanism, that title is basically what comes into my head. So this mechanism is coming up for review in May of next year. It currently enables the coal and gas industry to survive and thrive in its current form. So big emitters who are going to emit above a certain amount can buy credits. If they, have been given a fabulously high baseline and they don't achieve it, excellent, they can sell them to someone else who wants to keep polluting. So the offsets mechanism is where all of our problems sit with this and the credits. So ACCUs, SEMs, I won't bore you with all the unpacking of that. You can email me if you want to get really bored by them. But it's basically perverting the whole, what does net zero look like and what does the transition to renewable energies look like? And it allows more fossil fuel projects to be approved because we're cooking the books. Next slide, thanks. It facilitates fossil fuels is the short version. It's A, B, and C, which are most important for you to look at. So the purported design was that this mechanism is supposed to make A and B so hard to do that companies will automatically go to C, actually reducing their emissions. This isn't happening in real life. A is what everyone's pinning their hopes on, including the government, which is we'll just develop CCS, which is also why we're now seeing all these new fossil fuel projects having CCS as some form of component of what they're proposing. Whether or not they have a plan to actually build, it's a whole other issue. Next slide, thanks. Oh, look, I finished. Go me. Chelsea always laughs, thanks. So that was a super fast blast on some really complex stuff. Please, if you want to know more about some of the research and analysis the Australia Institute's been doing around the fossil fuel expansion, gas is a red hot topic at the moment, and carbon dumping, my email's there. And I also really recommend you go and have a look at The Point, which is a new kind of news site that we've got up, which Kirsty's actually published in recently off the back of the incredible EPBC circus that we all endured for the past few years. We've got a lot of gas stuff, and I really want to see a hell of a lot more carbon dumping stuff there as well. So thank you so much.
Thanks so much, Louise. So please, if you've got any questions about some of those very shocking revelations from Louise, please put them in the Q&A chat and we'll ask them at the end. Finally, we're going to hear now from Chelsea Deng, who is a fossil fuel industry campaigner at the Australian Marine Conservation Society. Chelsea will be talking about regulation and legislation of carbon dumping and what opportunities we have to engage in the approvals process as a community that wants to push back against really dangerous projects like this. Chelsea is a campaigner with AMCS's offshore fuels team working on a fossil fuel phase out for Australia's oceans. At AMCS, she focuses on the impact of seismic blasting on ocean wildlife and stopping the development of offshore carbon pollution dumping in Australia. So I'll hand over to you now, Chelsea.
Thanks so much, Suki. And yeah, hi, my name is Chelsea Deng from AMCS, and I'm just calling in today from unceded Wurundjeri country in Melbourne. Next slide, please. So I have been tasked today with the slightly boring task of telling you all about the environmental assessments and approvals process that INPEX has to go through. So please bear with me. I know it can be kind of dry. I'll try and get you through fast so we can get to questions. And I know that this slide is not really an inviting introduction to it. But this is grabbed from INPEX's project proposal application to the government under the EPBC Act. We'll explain what that is in a second. And all of relevant legislation that they either need to comply with or consider when planning and executing their project. Yeah, surprise, it's a lot. And I guess what I'm trying to say with this slide is that means there's a lot of opportunity for us to get involved. So yes, it's very bureaucratic. Yes, it's dry, but there's also periods of consultation baked into all of these processes, which means we have an opportunity as organizers and as the public to use our voice. So these red arrows that I've put are the main ones that we usually try and put public comments under when they're seeking their approvals. Next slide, please. So this is just a basic explainer of a couple of the acts that you saw in the previous slide. I'm just going to touch really lightly on the federal legislation today. Like Kirsty said, there is the Northern Territory Coordinator, and it's, his ability to be able to sort of waive assessments and approvals under NT legislation. So I'm just going to stick with the federal legislation for now. Essentially, all you need to know out of this table is that there are three major acts that INPEX has to seek approvals under in order to get along with this carbon pollution dumping project. That is the Environment Protection and Biodiversity Conservation Act, or the EPBC Act, the Offshore Petroleum and Greenhouse Gas Storage Act, or OPGGS Act, and the Environment Protection Sea Dumping Act, otherwise known as the Sea Dumping Act. And apologies, I will continue to use all of these acronyms just because it is way too long to say every single act every single time. I think the important thing to know out of all of these pieces of legislation is that together they regulate the environment, offshore fossil fuel activities, and dumping waste at sea. And so those are the three main things that INPEX will need to make sure that they are compliant with under federal legislation. You'll also see there bolded that under the EPBC Act, it said it regulates and protects matters of national environmental significance. That is just a legal term that encompasses things like threatened species, migratory species, the Commonwealth Marine Area, World Heritage Sites. So it's a lot of the places and animals that we need to protect across Australia. One thing I wanted to mention as well is that obviously if you've been watching the news, you've noticed that there have been recent EPBC Act reforms come through. I'm not going to touch on these in this presentation just because this project was lodged prior to those reforms going through. So we can at least put that on the shelf for now and not worry about it. Next slide, please. So we're back to sad, full, and confusing diagrams. My apologies. This is pulled from the Australian government's website, and it essentially steps you through the assessments process required by INPEX and by any other large development project in order to get the okay to actually undertake their project. And it's big, it's confusing, there's lots of little boxes. I think what I mean to say by this is that there are many, many steps along this way, and each of those boxes, there are several stages that INPEX has to undertake in each of those boxes to progress to the next stage, which is to say that there are lots of opportunities for action. You'll see I've put red, orange, and yellow boxes around certain stages on the process. The red box is the EPBC Act approvals. Now, like Kirsty said, INPEX has just entered that first stage of the EPBC Act approval process. So we are there now. All of the other boxes indicate some opportunity for consultation, and that means opportunity for us to get involved and make INPEX reconsider what it's doing, reconsider its environmental impact. So these are important stages along the way. The different colors just indicate whether or not the government is opening a public comment period or the company itself has to seek consultation from what they call quote unquote relevant persons before they submit an application. Next slide, please. So where are we at now in this huge process? Again, like Kirsty said, we are at the EPBC Act stage, which is usually the first big hurdle INPEX has to go through before it hits the other acts and gets approvals under the other acts, such as the OPGGS Act and the Sea Dumping Act. Now, this past Thursday, their public comment period closed for their EPBC referral application. A referral application is just that first step that INPEX submits a project to say, we think this project will have impacts to matters of national environmental significance, and we need to see if it needs government approval or not. Now that public comment period has closed, there is a legal provision that says the minister can accept late comments at his discretion. So there is a little bit of wiggle room in that. The next stages are all under the EPBC Act on this slide, and you'll see it takes us through to the end of next year. What this means is that this is a long environmental assessments project, and if you can remember, the EPBC Act is just one act of many that INPEX needs to seek approvals from. And again, just to, not to overstate it, but there are many opportunities for public comment and public consultation. And I think what we want to do, and what I'm assuming ECNT wants to do, is to make sure that we can capitalize on these public comment and public consultation processes to really hold INPEX's feet to the fire. Next stage, please. Next slide. And so I guess the overall question is, why bother with this whole process? Why bother with the drudgery and the bureaucracy of environmental assessments and approvals? And I just want to be clear to say that that's not necessarily where the win is. It's not where the smoking bullet is. It's not like the government is going to turn around tomorrow and say, you know what, we've been dumping billions of dollars into carbon pollution dumping. We've been dumping millions of dollars into maintaining good relations with INPEX. But we're going to turn around tomorrow and say, no, this project has clearly unacceptable environmental impacts, and we're not going to allow it to go ahead. As much as we would love for that to happen, that's probably not going to happen. And so what AMCS is aiming to do through this process is to force INPEX to do its due diligence and its environmental assessments. And sort of like what Dr. Ryan said, is that there's a real lack of information on environmental impacts of all of the components of these carbon pollution dumping projects. And it is very species dependent. It's very location dependent. Like Kirsty said, there's not a lot of baseline data in this proposed location. So we want to be able to force them to say, hey, you have to go back and do more research. You have to provide more information. You have to develop better environmental management and risk mitigation protocols. And another thing we want to do is make sure that the government isn't ramming through and rushing through these projects. And as we can see with the July announcement of this project getting major project status, that's clearly what they're doing. So we want to just slow it all down a bit. But what this is paired with is it has to be paired with public opposition, social pressure, political pressure, and investigations on INPEX and their responsibility to even carry out a project like this. So it's all part of this network of campaign actions to build pressure to get INPEX to back down from this project. I think that's the end of my slides. I don't know how I was doing on time, but hopefully we can get some time back.
Thanks so much, Chelsea. It's really useful to be able to see those moments that we can intervene as a community. We have a couple of questions in the chat. I'll just kick off with one, which is, we often see, particularly in the NT, big proposals like this that make a big fanfare but never get off the ground. That's a very strong history in the NT of projects like that. And I guess given this, how seriously should people be taking this project? I don't know if Kirsty, you'd like to start with that one.
Yes, the Northern Territory white elephant, the feature of the never-ending quest to develop the North. And I listed some of the most recent projects in a submission recently, like the Prawn Farm, Project Sea Dragon on the WA border, the Iron Ore Province in the Roper region, the ship lift, which is going to cost us billions of dollars. I mean, the list goes on. And it is quite hard to work out how seriously we should take proposals like this. I would say, and I'd add, Middle Arm is a project that will undoubtedly be a white elephant if it goes ahead, and is also looking very precarious in terms of it actually happening. I think INPEX and this particular proposal is one that we need to be treating very seriously, though. INPEX has very, very deep pockets. It has a very close relationship with both the Northern Territory government and the federal government. There's a geopolitical context, which I think is relevant here. The relationship goes beyond trade and into the way that we're positioning ourselves vis-a-vis China and other, nations in the Asia-Pacific region. And, INPEX got up the biggest project ever in the Northern Territory, which is the Ichthys LNG facility. It spent an extra few $1 billion, which it just sort of had in its back pocket, bringing the gas from WA all the way to Darwin. And I think we need to take this very seriously. And the number of gas companies that are connected to this, companies like Total Energies, companies like Woodside, and ENI, or any, make pretty clear to me that they're serious about this. And, you know, I'm not going to say it's going to happen. This is sort of untested on this scale. It's, you know, a failed technology in many regards, but they'll do everything they can to get it up. It's absolutely essential to the expansion of the, you know, the social license and the expansion of the fossil fuel industry in Australia, in Northern Australia, and globally. So I think we do need to treat this seriously. I'm happy for others to chime in.
I might just do a yes and to what Kirsty said of the geopolitics of this particular one are really worth taking seriously. So the Japanese ambassador spoke at the National Press Club 4 weeks ago, and a large part of his speech was about the relationship of Australia and Japan for gas and carbon dumping, and this project was mentioned. So this is something that ambassadors and ministers and prime ministers are talking about very actively and are really wanting to see happen. So I think it might be a white elephant, but it might be a white elephant that's allowed to leave the zoo.
Thanks, Lisa. Would anyone else like to comment on the panel before we move to the next question?
Yeah, just real quick. My experience, again, limited specifically to seismic surveys, is that lots of projects get proposed, lots of projects start going through the EIS phase, the commentary phase, and all that. Lots of projects die on the vine, but generally not because of regulators stepping in and stopping them. Generally, when they don't get up, it's because either financials or community outrage or those external factors, not because they've decided, oh yeah, we're actually not going to do this after all.
We have another question here. Someone was curious to hear, Ryan, I'm not sure if you can answer this, but about the nature of the adverse effects of seismic blasting on human divers, whether you've seen anything like that in your studies or heard of anything.
Yeah, so not my wheelhouse, obviously, but from the training I've been given for working around seismic air guns, and from what I know about what we can extrapolate from things like whales. So if you're very close to an air gun when it goes off, like talking like meters, it can inject air bubbles into your skin. You get an embolism and you die. Further range away, you kind of, that's very close. Anything outside of that, the biggest issues you have are that immense pressure wave from it and the particle motion acting on you. Because our lungs are basically air-filled cavities, that creates this a pressure gradient or pressure differential. So that gives that pressure wave something to act upon. So if you're close enough, collapsed lungs. If you're a bit farther away, severe ear damage. If you're a bit further away from that, temporary ear damage. So yeah, it really depends on the size of the air guns, how close you are. But just as an anecdote, when we were first trialing our first seismic experiment, we had a very small air gun, 45 cubic inches, and apologize for the units, that's industry standard, not my Americanness. So that's about a little bit less than a liter. We had a diver that we didn't know about, that it wasn't supposed to be in the water, but he was in the water across the Derwent River from us, so about 12 Ks away from our study site. And he said he could feel every single one of the air gun blasts in his chest the entire time. And that was a very small air gun. So 45 cubic inches, most operating, like the boat that comes down the most often to operate commercial surveys has a 4,000 cubic inch array, which is about 65 liters. So massive difference in terms of scale.
Gosh. Thanks for that, Ryan. We've got two other questions here. The first one is, any ideas on how this project sits in Australia's defence perspective? Would seem potentially disruptive to shipping and subs. Don't know who would like to kick off with that one.
I can pull it up really quickly. I just pulled up INPEX's referral document just to make sure. There is some overlap with defense. I can't really speak to shipping, unfortunately, but it's mainly defense in the frame of surveillance for any illegal activity or illegal shipping. I'm not sure if it overlaps with any sort of areas for defense practices or practice and training areas. It might bit, but I'm not sure if Kirsty or anybody more locally can speak to the defense aspect of it. They have mentioned it in their application, but to what extent, unclear.
Sorry, we're just unmuting you, Kirsty.
Look, I don't have anything particularly sort of clever to say on this, but I would note that, you know, obviously Darwin's value to many people in Canberra and internationally is it's the fact that it's sort of strategic defence post. And we mentioned the geopolitical kind of context for this and our alliance with Japan. I just always think whenever we are talking about Darwin Harbour and the infrastructure, just how sort of bizarre Darwin Harbour has become as an expression of, you know, Australia's place geopolitically and particularly sort of in a defence context. And we are facing rapid militarisation and we are facing increased risk here in Darwin, you know, from that increased militarisation. It is not increasing the security of everyday people who live in Darwin. And I think, frankly, sort of fossil fuel infrastructure like this, just like Darwin LNG and Ichthys LNG, actually create significant national security and defence risks because of possible targeting of them if we do escalate to war. So that's something that when in the Northern Territory, militarisation is ever present and is a thread that runs through almost every project and is indeed the sort of rationale for the continued support of Darwin as a place that is invested in.
Thanks so much, Kirsty. We'll finish off with this last question here, and if you have any other questions that we didn't get to, please feel free to put it in the chat and we can get back to you via email. But this is a question from Victoria. Some of the company names behind these NT carbon dumping proposals are familiar to communities across Australia and overseas. Do you think there are opportunities to mobilise opposition to NT proposals nationally? And is that likely to be influential on NT or federal decision makers if it can be achieved?
I'll let Louise go. If we cannot mobilise people nationally in relation to NT projects, then I might as well quit now. So please, let's do it and let's keep doing it as we have done it in the past. Over to you, Lou.
Yeah, what Kirsty said, as usual. Yes, yes, and yes. The sequestration nation vision, I think, especially with that map I popped up, which is taken from the report, shows that this is not just Darwin. It starts with Darwin if this train leaves the station. How CCS has gotten this far is, you know, it boggles the mind, but to the point of the question, it's the brands that we are seeing behind it, which is why it's got so far ahead. And we need to really be cognizant of, we are currently in a political environment where fossil fuel companies are calling the shots. So if you look at the taxation system, the fact that we changed a sea dumping act to allow this to happen, this tells you where the power is lying at the moment. So mobilisation in all the magical forms needs to be happening. And that includes talking to your local MP that this is not something that they can, you know, just hope happens out of mind, out of sight in Darwin because, you know, it takes a while to get there, something. This is something that if we let it keep going is going to be Queensland, Victoria, my home state of Tasmania, the Bass Strait. And this comes back to that seismic project that Ryan mentioned, the TGS one, which I spent an inordinate amount of my working life working on. That was a seismic proposal for CCS exploration. It was well off any of the gas things. So part of the sequestration nation vision is big hubs like Darwin bringing in CCS, and they want that to be the proving point. So we need mobilisation that this is the new edge of fossil fuels. This isn't just carbon dumping. This is what the fossil fuel industry needs to keep thriving and surviving. And we need to slap it down as quickly as possible. And that comes through making sure that the finance is not appealing for it, that communities say hell no anywhere it comes near them, and that federal and state decision makers, and I'm being broad, it's decision makers of all stripes, need to know that there is no social license for carbon dumping in our ocean or on our lands.
Unfortunately, we're at time now. We've got one question regarding CO2 leakage, which I will get back to you on the person who asked the question. I'll follow up for you, but very conscious that Chelsea is writing an answer, so hopefully that will help. Just want to firstly also, Sarah, if you could just share the petition as well, that would be great. We have a petition that is on the ECNT website under the Take Action Now tab. The link is just about to come up on your screens. It's Stop the Dump, so please make sure you sign that petition. It's in the chat as well. And I also want to reiterate what Louise was saying. Make sure you're speaking to your local representatives wherever you are in the country. And also, particularly in Darwin, we are awash with consultation at the moment. Santos has been running it. The Energy Club has been running sessions on carbon dumping. There are many opportunities for us in Darwin to go to these sessions and ask the questions that are not being answered and to raise our concerns. So strongly recommend that you do that, and we'll be keeping in touch with you here at the ECNT. And I'd just like to wrap up by saying a huge thank you to all our presenters tonight. We're exceptionally grateful for your expertise and skills and knowledge that will empower us as a community to be able to move forward with this latest threat facing our harbour and our wonderful home. And thank you everyone who has come along on a midweek information session on carbon dumping. We're very, very excited to have you on board. And as I said, please sign the petition on our website, and we'll make sure that any updates in this space will be reaching out to you. So thank you everyone for that, and we'll finish it there.